And class is in session. You're listening to Shit Shooting 101. I'm your host, Joshua Lee. Joining us today, author of such books as Dark Matter Monsters, Opening Minds, Black Swan Ghosts, and Planetary Intelligence. Here to put us on track for the trek of transcendence, a trailblazer tripping the trials of untraveled treasures, he is weirdly wonderful and wonderfully weird and wandering the wonders of bewilderment and wildest fantasies. A space cowboy earning his spurs behind two smoking barrels drenched in the diamond dust of an unpredictable meteor shower. It's Dr. Simeon Hein. Simeon, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Joshua. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I like to just jump right into things, and I wanted to
Sure.
talk about crop circles.
Yeah.
According to cropcirclesaccess.com, I don't know how reliable they are, but this is what I'm getting this information from. The oldest documented report of a crop circle occurred in 1590, although numerous undatable legends go back as far as the inception of domesticated crops. With this in mind, military technology, as well as any terrestrial technology, can be ruled out as a cause or contributor to such phenomena. This certainly weakens the case of two men with rope and boards. So, what do past hypotheses tell us about the creation of crop circles versus what modern science provides as a possibility? Is there any consensus as to who or what is causing these strange patterns?
Well, yeah, I think so. I just think it's more complex than people want it to be. Our minds tend to want to oversimplify things. And when I got involved with crop circles, it was in 1996, one of the first remote viewing sessions, sort of anomalous targets I did was a crop circle. I was studying remote viewing back at the Farsight Institute in Atlanta, and a crop circle target came up in the target list, and we did it. And I didn't know what a crop circle was. I had just graduated from graduate school, and I had taught statistics as assistant professor at WSU. I didn't know it, but what they were, but I thought my session was interesting. Remote viewing, you're getting this non-local information, and you don't know if it's right or wrong at the end without some feedback. Usually the feedback consists of a picture, or you could go visit the site that you have been remote viewing. And in this case, the only way for me to get the feedback, apart from looking at the picture, was the triple Julia set from Windmill Hill in 1996, was to go over there. And I happened to run into someone giving crop circle tours, Ron Russell from Denver area. And he said, we go over there every year, and they're really mysterious, and strange things happen in them. And we'd love to have you come along and just help us sort of decipher the mystery. So I went in 97, and that's when I first started going in them, walking in them, and so forth. And there were really odd things happening around that I could see happening pretty quickly, which was camera and battery failure, device destruction, electronic device destruction inside crop circles. People talked about seeing orbs and UFOs around these circles. And, we heard about these cases like from 1590 that I believe you're talking about the mowing devil, which was reported. Yeah, I forget where it was from. It's from a wood cutting from that time period. Uh, and we're not really sure what happened back then. The one of the Old Testaments, I think, talks about markings in the field. Maybe it goes back even further, Joshua. But what we found out is it was quite complex. I mean, there was this idea that people couldn't make patterns that complex. There are people who are, familiar with crop circles. There are patterns in wheat crop, other types of grain crop. They could even be in, well, over there in the UK, wheat is called corn, but they can even happen in what we in US call corn too. And yeah, they would call it barley corn over there, and corn. Um, but as time went on, we did come across people who claimed to have make them, and they did take us out on different experiments. As I documented in Opening Minds, there were people that like they did them for advertisements or something like this, and we didn't think they would be able to do it. Um, Here's a picture of the static meter that we would use. to measure static charges, which would often be quite high in a crop circle, but not in the surrounding crop, and different circles that would affect our devices and cameras. There definitely were electromagnetic effects. And, people's GPSs in this Devil's Den formation. I mean, it just was completely this formation affected a lot of devices within half an hour that I could see of them just stop not working. So I could see there was an effect. We didn't think that any humans could be involved with that. And there are cases of them being created by UFOs or vortex plasmas and things like this, no doubt about it. But as time went on, we did come across people that said they could make them and took us out to see demonstrations. First, they were the legal demonstrations for paid ads and things, but we wanted to see them done at night. And then they took us out at night, some groups, and they thought we were open, so they did approach us. They had seen myself and Ron lecture at conferences where we'd say no human can flip and make these. They're too perfect and too precise, and it's not enough. You've heard these arguments. Not enough darkness in the summer, and all this. But these, I have to tell you, the groups that I saw were good. They communicated with walkie-talkies. They had lasers to create straight lines in a field, and they were used to surveillance, so they knew how to crouch down in the crop when any cars would come by. So people were doing them, and we found out that some of the ones that affected our devices had been man-made. So what we eventually realized was it wasn't some remnant of a UFO propulsion system leaving pixie dust in the fields. It was something about the shape, whether a UFO made it, whoever made it, or humans, something about this helical vortical shape, vortex type pattern that was having electromagnetic effects. And it's something that I'm still studying to this day.
Yeah, that goes along with one of the questions that I had written down for you. Crops are laid out into mathematical rows, spaced in sequence, although very close to one another. We know that trees and the rainforest communicate with one another through their root structure. Is it possible that the crop's energy fields themselves are creating the geometric patterns?
Right. That's really the question, isn't it? Is it something about the pattern itself that is creating some sort of non-ordinary EM effect? I mean, I would say the answer is yes. And we saw it happen many, many times. The last time I did a tour there was 2019 with a group bringing people along. And Joshua, every year that we went there, we would see camera and battery effects. People's devices just go on the fritz. Now, often when that happens, it just stops working. So it's not like spectacular. But I mean, how often does your camera just stop working? I mean, batteries draining. It just doesn't happen. I asked farmers there, did they ever have this happen? They said, no, not in regular fields. It was something about those patterns. It would happen at the edge as you walked in. And that meant that the fields of energy were different where the crop was twisted around in a vertical pattern. So there was something like a phase singularity being created there, which neutralizes electromagnetic signals and other types of EM properties, vector potential and so forth, come to the fore, where the ordinary EM fields, Maxwellian EM fields, neutralize each other. And there were other things happening around them that were equally odd. Lots of orbs were seen in and around these crop circles. I've seen them myself. Space-time anomalies where people feel like they either went into another time period or that somehow the time did not flow in the right way. Like too much time had passed, or their watch only said, 15 minutes had passed and it felt like an hour. Go out to the car and get batteries and feel like, oh, I'm finally coming back. And it's just like a few minutes have gone by. That sort of experience. So there is something active about crop circles that seem to be replicated by people. Even Doug and Dave were playing a role because Doug, I believe, was an artist from Australia. He had seen the Tully saucer nests those were UFO, UAP type craft that would leave swirls behind in the grasses and marshes. You can look them up, Tully saucer nests. So Doug Bauer, uh, I believe, was the artist in Australia who had seen this that attempted to replicate it when he got back to the UK. I'm not saying he originated the whole phenomena, but he was part of it. And all of these circle makers that I talked to, Joshua, said they got a lot more media attention than they ever thought they would get, especially when they were just teenagers rolling around in the grass that the helicopters would show up. And if you and your buddies go out before your parents have a curfew set for you, and you're out there from like 8 until 9 when you have to come in, and helicopters show up the next day with BBC cameras, you're gonna, like, as a kid, you're gonna keep making more of these. And they did. They got better and better at it. And that's why you saw this progression from the 80s to the 90s. All of these groups I talked to didn't think it was possible for humans to do this. They just were like researchers, like maybe me or you. And they were curious. And they went out. And one of them told me, he said, maybe we can create contact with UFOs by making them. They got tired of waiting around for something to happen up there on the downs at night. It can be cold in the summer at night in the UK. You're kind of in a northerly direction. I've been out there many times. It's pretty cold. You want a down jacket. Uh, it's not like summer in the US. And some of them told me they just got tired of waiting for something to happen. So I thought, well, maybe we'll make a small one and the aliens will communicate back to us. That's how it started making it. It's not from any sort of, uh, you know, insincere desire to trick people or anything like that. It's just this curiosity. Maybe we can make a small one. And they said, whoa, we can really make it kind of okay looking, just like 10 feet across by rolling their bodies. And they realized, maybe we can make it bigger. It's just like what humans do. They just started making the bigger. So my view, Joshua, is people did make them. The conference organizers didn't want the public to know that, because when you hold conferences, you want to fill the seats. And I know from talking to lots of people that some of the conference organizers knew that humans had become involved with it at least since 95, and didn't want to really tell us, even to the point where they were directing where these circles were made. And there was communication between the circle makers and the conference organizers, which, I mean, it starts to go in the direction of some sort of organized crime here. Because, I mean, the circle makers wanted good photos of their circles after being out. And I've done this, being out there all night with them. It's a lot of work. You have no sleep that night. You really want good photographs. That's the one reward you get the next day. So these conference organizers would find out where they were ahead of time. Now, to me, that doesn't denigrate the topic, because, as I said in Opening Minds, my tagline was, real or man-made, it's the wrong question. The question is, why do these shapes create odd electromagnetic effects that wipe out cameras, wipe out batteries, wipe out very sophisticated professional cameras? I heard this happen to the BBC by Silbury Hill from the National Geographic Channel when they were filming me for one of their documentaries. They didn't end up using any of the footage, but I stood out there in the sun and got sunburned talking to them. But I got this great story. They showed my hand holding the static meter at the very end. For some reason, they didn't like what I said about people making them, even though the crew said, this is great. We've never heard anything like this. Somehow the producers wanted to be, and I hate to disillusion people a little bit, but some of the people that bring you this information have secondary interests of selling things to you, so they don't want to tell you the whole truth. It's just more complex. But I got this great story. They said the BBC's cameras went down so badly they had to call London for instructions how to reboot the cameras. They're software-driven beta cams, as they're called. Professional $40,000 cameras. How do we restart it? So this happens, and it's a type of interesting behavior of static electricity charge clusters creating alternate states of matter. The biggest shock to me when I started looking into Bigfoot encounters in Colorado was witnesses telling me the same type of thing happened around Bigfoot. Battery, camera failure, device failure, space-time distortions. And that's what led me into these directions where we're looking at the paranormal as actually a scientific process that's been mislabeled as, supernatural. I mean, it's something super, and it's natural, but it's real, and there's a scientific explanation for this. So I've seen this up close with the crop circles, and what you get around crop circles is what you get around ghost sightings, what you get around Bigfoot, what you get around UFOs, which must mean that what we call paranormal has some fundamental underlying principles to it, which is what fascinates me.
So what you're talking about there are some fundamental scientific principles that could be studied and should be studied. So why, on both ends of the spectrum, when it comes to the academically inclined as well as those on the outer fringes of it, why are they both opposed to what you're suggesting?
That is an excellent question. And it's something I think about every single day. As a sociologist, that's what my PhD is in sociology. We look at these things. Why don't people look at what's right in front of them? Because we call it in sociology hidden events. These are things that people experience that they don't want to talk about for fear of ridicule, stigma, ostracism, giggle factor. And so I think there are two answers to this in terms of these phenomena within the US scientific system, maybe three answers. First of all, after World War II, during World War II, science in the US got a lot more practical and oriented towards warfare and winning the war against the Axis powers, at the time, Germany and Japan. And it changed the face of physics in the direction of creating nuclear weapons. And that big change, and the author, physicist from Germany, Alexander Unziger, has a great YouTube channel, has written a lot of books, how the US ruined physics. I mean, he's talked about this, is it went from being this thing that looked at this discipline that looked at theoretical questions and the deeper meaning of these questions and how it makes sense, quantum mechanics and so forth. It went from so-called fundamental questions to the basis of physics and reality into make the bombs faster and better because of the feeling at the time of the threat of the Axis powers, and then next Soviet Union continued it on this Cold War. So we never went back to this open questioning of reality and data in an open-minded way, an honest and sincere way. It went into this shut up and calculate mode in physics. So people stopped asking questions about fundamentals. Physicists at the time, like Yakir Aronov, and one of the inventors of the Aronov-Bohm effect, a very interesting quantum principle that shows action at a distance, spooky action at a distance. He wasn't even allowed in Israel to study this. Aronov later called Aronov-Bohm effect this frequency resonance effect between matter at a distance. They told him, oh, there's no jobs in that. So this affected anyone post-World War II, probably around the world. It just became more interested in calculate faster, better, figure things out, rather than asking the deeper questions. I think that's one of the reasons. The next reason is that the US government likely encountered something very strange at Roswell in 1947. And the CIA, around the time of the Robertson panel, concluded that the public might panic if they found out about this sort of phenomena, what it really was, and that measures should be put in place to create disinformation campaigns to keep the US public from really finding out the truth about wherever these UFO UAPs are from. And I'm not saying it's just one place, but there was a decision made to create disinformation. And part of that disinformation program, if you know anything about counterintelligence, is to use ridicule, to make fun of topics, to kind of hide them in plain sight by making fun of them so people don't want to investigate. So you create things like the newspaper, the National Enquirer, things like that, to have them right there at the checkout line. And that seems to have been a CIA owned paper, right? I forgot the Pope, or the one of the owners had worked in the CIA. You sort of have it right there, but you make fun of it, like who's having alien babies and just ridiculous stuff that makes you think, oh, this is ridiculous. Why do they even have these papers at the checkout stand? I mean, what is this? It's a type of disinformation and a type of psychological. It's a psyop against the public. So that's the second reason. Those PSYOP programs have been going on ever since Roswell, as far as I know, maybe even before. to keep people like you and me from seriously considering other possibilities that the way the universe might work. My particular favorite is parallel realities and multiverses. You just don't go in that direction because the US government's decided that they're going to ridicule it. And Joshua, let's be honest, they're not going to fund you for anything related to that research. And I can tell you as an academic, you spend years getting your PhD, and then it's going to take years to get tenure. Like you always have this eyes on your prize. I hate to say this. It's terrible that academics has become this instead of an open discussion of truth. It's focused on grants and prizes and awards and all these things that academics like to get. They like they like attention as much as anyone else. They like to be in the good graces of the people. National Science Foundation, National Institutes for Health, places like that, CDC, that fund research in a big way. All the different organizations out there that fund scientific research. You're not going to go into a topic when your supervisor says, that's a dead end. It's going to get us laughed at. You get the picture. So they did this with the whole UFO paranormal topic until recently, as we found out, OSAP, ATIP, and so forth. I think that's another reason why these topics are not delved into, because the American public's been conditioned into conforming to what big institutions want for the sake of job security. Let's be honest about it. People are focused on what they feel is going to advance them as in their career. In the government world, it's called things that are career enhancing. And it's a type of corruption within the academic establishment, within the scientific community, that leads to a lot of negative things that I can say as a 30-year subscriber to Science Magazine, the publication, AAAS, American Association for Advancement of Science. They're still dealing with it now. I read the magazine every week. I mean, it's plagiarism, false data. It's coming back to haunt the scientific community because there's so much pressure to publish and get those column inches, citations, and all this, that people end up paying to be in journals. They end up paying editors to just accept articles without real review. Oh, lots of money, thousands of dollars. So this sort of whole, I mean, if you kind of corrupt things like science got corrupted in some ways, you're going to end up dealing with a lot of corrupt, plagiarized paper. So that's a second answer. The third answer really seems to be that the scientific community itself became so enamored of its role in American society that it didn't want to take any more risks, partly for the reasons I mentioned, explanation too. And this happened with cold fusion. I just listened to this incredible lecture by Peter Hagelstein of MIT, who met Martin Fleischmann of Fleischmann Pumps from the University of Utah, 89 discoverers of excess heat and what was called back then cold fusion, what we call now LEN, or low energy nuclear reaction. And in this lecture, you can see it's right on YouTube. It's from about 5 years ago. He said, even if cold fusion powered MIT, gave them all their electricity, they wouldn't admit it was real. They are just, it's like a religion to argue against not mainstream science. Anything that's not mainstream, we're going to ridicule it. We're going to laugh at it, just like they did Fleischmann and Pons. We're going to call it pathological science. We're going to call it junk science. All these pejorative terms, ad hominem attacks, all of this. And here's Peter Hagelstein saying he thinks it's such a huge mistake the way MIT went in that direction, because all the labs that didn't reproduce cold fusion weren't doing it the way Fleischmann and Pons. They didn't take a month to set the experiment up the way Fleischmann and Pons, it's to be done very carefully. If you listen to people that have successfully reproduced cold fusion labs in Italy, top government labs, it's very finicky. It's just got to be done just right with the right materials, not any old palladium and deuterium. The palladium has to be fraction cracks. You get the idea. It has to. It's very fine tuned. If you don't have that type of patience, I mean, Google recently attempted to reproduce cold fusion and they couldn't. But the person they were imitating, Alexander Parkhomov, the 225-day reactor, he got it going for 225 days. Google couldn't figure it out with all their resources. They couldn't do it. And I asked someone who knows a lot about this, Bob Greenyer of the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, nonprofit, has a good YouTube channel. I said, well, what did they do wrong? He gave me the reasons. I didn't totally understand them. And it had to do with some really fine-tuned points about ways of measuring heat and just little differences. There are some scientific processes that just are not mechanistic. They're more resonance based. Joshua, they're more like an instrument. You got to tune it just right. You could take a really expensive Stradivarius violin, but not everyone's going to be able to play it really well without the proper training. Some science is more in that direction, and that goes against the scientific mechanistic outlook that it should be reproducible, that it should be dependable. There are resonant reactions that are, I would argue, as a scientist, that are more like a Stradivarius violin than they are like a cog in a wheel, a car. They just don't simply work for anybody. You have to know what you're doing and have to set it up right. So those reasons are why people overall do not want to go into areas that are considered fringe or something. And the problem with that, Joshua, is throughout history, everything that's ever been new, pretty much with the exception of Isaac Newton, he's the outlier. Everything's been ridiculed. Copernicus, Galileo, you know, Wright brothers. Just name your scientist. The microscope, Leeuwenhoek, Anton Leeuwenhoek invents the microscope in Holland around the 1600s. No one would use it. They said we don't need to look through that. We already know what's going on. Have you ever heard someone say that? I don't need to look through a microscope. I'm a doctor. I know it's being caused by imbalance of fluids because that's what Galen and that group of Greek doctors 2,000 years ago said was the cause of illness was fluid imbalance, the four humors. We know that's what causes it. Why do we need to look through, see little microbes? It's always been prejudiced against the newcomers, the new thinkers. And yet without those new thinkers like the Wright brothers, we wouldn't have the life we have now. The Steve Jobs and the people like that who just saw another way to do something and said, let's just do it differently. They always seem wacko and far out until we're buying their products. We all ride on airplanes now, but the Wright brothers did not even do demonstrations in the US for fear of this exact question that you raised, the ridicule factor. It's something in our psychology and in these, I would say, post-World War II influences, Cold War, so forth, that has kind of exacerbated this ridicule of the different. And because these institutions are all centrally funded and you want your tenure, I was given that lecture too, you spend a lot of time, you do want to be successful in this field, don't you? You won't, you're not going to study this and this and this because that's not going to help your career. It's a type of blackmail. And I think that the system we have in the US has destroyed science in some ways, to some extent. I know it's a strong statement, but there are things that are true that are not being investigated. And that's part of the reasons why. And the people that founded the OSAP program, later known as ATIP, encountered the same thing in the federal government. Did you see those Kona Blue documents about a month ago?
No.
Online. So this was, and I'll stop talking in a second so you can respond. This was a Department of Homeland Security proposal to look at UFOs and paranormal, $50 to $80 million proposal to look into these topics, to see medical effects of UFOs, right? Remote viewing. There's a whole, if you look at the Kona Blue documents, it's declassified now. That was the code name since it was going to be a special access program. Remote Viewing Institute to look into remote viewing and all these things. And again, they didn't fund it at the end. And Peter Lukatsky wrote that book, Skinwalkers, the Pentagon, about cryptids and portal areas and skinwalker ranges. Said that when he went to DHS, they said this would make us, this would affect our reputation within the hierarchy of intelligence agencies in the US government. In other words, we're not going to get the funding we want because Congress is going to start laughing at us for studying dogmen. So, and werewolves. So, I mean, this is the reality situation. We're in where the possibility exists that we could fall behind in science because China and Russia are not afraid to look into these topics. Soviet Union was well ahead in these non-condensed matter physics, coherent matter. And there's always the possibility that the US becomes a second-rate scientific country because of this lack of interest in even things that are repeatable. I mean, I would say to any mainstream scientist, you tell me why batteries fail in crop circles. I've got at least 5 10 videos of it on YouTube. The same sort of thing. How people walk in, the device stops working. You say, oh, just random. Well, I haven't had devices fail on the beach or in the mountains or at Disneyland. They've only done it in crop circles and around paranormal sites. So why does it happen? I mean, and so I think there's a lot of good things to learn about the nature of reality from where our electronics ceases to work.
So you mentioned orbs, how
Yeah.
they seem to be witnessed anywhere that there's anything paranormal experienced. I mean, haunted locations, Bigfoot, as you mentioned, UFO sightings. Um, do you think that this is just some sort of psychological reaction to the resonance and frequency, or is there anything physical to it?
No, there really is. And orbs overlap into ball lightning. And there's hundreds of years of studies of ball lightning. And you can read these accounts online. If you just search for ball lightning, you'll read one account after the other. And one explanation is in this direction. You said that maybe it's an effect on the brain, on the phosphenes in the eye of some sort of optical illusion. But I don't think so because they leave holes in glass. They go through planes. Everyone sees them. And they behave in very interesting ways. Ball lightning and orbs are a type of what, I mentioned the Aharonov-Bohm effect. They are a relative of coherent matter. They're in the family of coherent matter. Coherent matter being the next state of matter past plasmas. Plasma is the one state of matter past gases. Electrified gases are plasmas, the most abundant type of matter in the universe by far. Nebulas and lightning and aurora borealis that are plasmas, fluorescent lights. And past that are these organized plasmas, what people call plasmoids, sort of self-sustaining luminous spheres, toroids, and so forth. And the Soviets, through KGB research, actually figured out what this was. It's something called the fractal toroidal moment, hypertoroidal moment. It's a type of extension of Maxwell's uh, work in electromagnetics that is sort of what's, if you've ever looked at fractal geometry, Mandelbrot, stuff like that, it's electromagnetics that is shaped around not perfect circular shapes or Euclidean shapes, but fractal shapes, branching structures. And these fractal structures are like donuts within donuts surrounding donut rings, if you can imagine donuts and more donuts around the rings, all the way down, to this smallest state of matter, the zero-point field. It compresses electrons in ways that make them act differently. It forces them to be coherent, to be the same frequency, to interact. The big thing we learned from all of this research in crop circles and orbs and so forth is that there is an attractive force between electrons that's never really been studied very much by science. The main feature about particles that we have got, received from academics and scientists, this Pauli exclusion principles, which says that electrons can't share the same orbital, so there's a repulsive effect. But there is an attractive force that even Wilhelm Weber, the physicist, discovered in the 1840s. And he even predicted what we now call superconductivity. Over 180 years ago, Wilhelm Weber, a German physicist, looking at EM fields before Maxwell, was looking at it in terms of Newtonian laws, which were the main physics at the time. And he even concluded that if you put particles very close together, like 10 to the minus 13 meters, they would have an attractive force, create negative mass. Negative mass being sort of inverse of ordinary mass, a type of something like antimatter. And he sort of saw what would happen with superconductivity when you have Cooper pairs and particles really close together. Well, ball lightning orbs seem to have a lot to do with that. And it's something that is more of a quantum effect than a Newtonian effect when you look at its behavior, which is it seems to persist in non-thermal ways. It creates heat, but it's cool to the touch, but it can boil water. All these paradoxes. It can move through a wall, but other times when it goes through something, it leaves a hole. Sometimes it's totally innocuous, and sometimes it kills people. It can evaporate a necklace around you, but leave you unharmed. Just the oddest things, which is more a function of frequency than it is of this mass effect that we're used to from combustion fuels and so forth, which are more predictable and more easy to understand chemical. This is not a chemical process, even though it has chemical ramifications. Even what we call cold fusion seems to be a type of micro ball lightning effect. So basically, what there is going on is there's another state of matter that is something we've seen evidence of it for the centuries, and we're finally coming to realize that it sort of inhabits a different part of our reality. The researcher Ken Shoulders, who used to work for NSA, then worked for SRI in microelectronics, he said that they sort of occupy another reality within our own space, ball lightning and orbs, and that they just behave very strangely and they don't couple to our reality, but they have very strange effects on electronics, instantaneous electronic failure, battery failure, and so forth. And what he realized, which is the key to this whole thing, is that ball lightning permittivity, ball lightning orbs lower permittivity, the one of the fundamental components that determines the electromagnetic activity around us, is something called permittivity. It's the ability of a material to resist an external electric field. And materials have different permittivities. As you get to less resistance, the permittivity goes lower, and higher permittivity things are like insulators, like rubber and wood and things like that. So ball lightning likes lower permittivity environments, and it exists in a lower permittivity environment. And for that reason, it's almost as if it's in a parallel reality, just in the sense that the speed of light, the speed of propagation of electromagnetic fields is a formula based on permittivity and permeability. C equals 1 over square root of permeability times permittivity, permeability being the magnetic constant. Now, here's the key. Normally, permittivity and permeability are set to 1 in the vacuum of space. And so we never really think about it. And materials vary a little bit. Everyone's familiar with this. When you put a straw in a glass, you know the way it bends? That's because of a shift in permittivity. But what about if the material is oscillating in the permittivity, or it's even going into the negative? Those types of objects and processes are going to look blurry and weird. And that's what we call paranormal. So I'm pretty much convinced that all of these phenomena are associated with ball lightning and orbs. And it's a fine point. I don't know exactly where one begins and the other ends. We're still learning about all this. But all of these phenomena, including ghosts, including cryptids, Bigfoot, UFOs, crop circles, cold fusion, low energy nuclear reaction, prefer lower permittivity spaces where the permittivity is even oscillating. And that's why they hang out together. They're in a reality where it's easy for orbs to form spontaneously. You and I might see this come out of a clock radio one day during a thunderstorm, or even in clear air, people see them coming down the trail, hiking or something like this, ball lightning. But the real point here is what we have considered to be constants, permittivity and permeability, is pretty much an arbitrary assumption of physicists for 150 years or so. They can vary. And I looked it up recently on ChatGPT to see if I'm just making this up. And it said, nope, oscillating permittivity is variable permittivity is considered a type of medical detection because our organs have slightly different permittivity and they can be detected by this impedance tomography, electrical impedance tomography, which looks at permittivity and it scans us for permittivity and it can detect this and see your organs that way. So what the Russians figured out, the Russian and Soviet scientists, is if it oscillates back and forth, it's not fixed anymore. Light does not propagate in the same way. And they could not take pictures of their lab produced ball lightning. And to me, that was a pretty big clue that you get blurry pictures of what? UFOs, Bigfoot, cryptids, crop circles. It's probably because, well, it's certainly one possibility that the permittivity is oscillating there, just like you get in these labs by some of these Soviet scientists, Russian scientists who noticed that their photos were always blurry of their lab produced ball lightning. So that's why I think it connects back to science and why the Soviet Union and Russia got so far ahead of the US. Now, they have a very corrupt political system still to this day, as we can see. And it hampered their science. It doesn't mean the science wasn't developed. It just probably for our benefit did not get turned into applications. Or we would be probably feeling that a little more right now. But I mean, certainly they developed the theory of why you can create in the lab artificial paranormal effects. You even get this, Josh, we even get this around remote viewing sometimes. Remote viewing, just putting your mind on a distant target.
Yeah, that's actually what I was about to move on to, remote viewing. I'm going to leap right to one of the extremes of it because I have to ask this question.
Yeah.
What do remote viewing practices show us about interplanetary exchange as well as our potential extraterrestrial origins?
Well, it's a good question. We just don't know because RV always depends on feedback. And when we do RV sessions about extraterrestrials and cosmological phenomena and so forth, we can't always get the feedback. We don't know at the end of the day, Joshua, if we made it up or if it's real. I mean, you could say, well, this viewer is always accurate against 3D targets on Earth. So their other sessions are probably reasonably accurate too on other topics that don't have immediate feedback. Um, that could be true. I've seen a lot of good viewers, and when I gave them ET type targets or UFO pictures, they came up with really interesting stuff. And we're talking blind targets. Like I said, oh, you're viewing a UFO. I mean, I just gave them a picture in a folder, and they don't see it until it's done. And they came up with this UFO type stuff, which is fascinating. Um, so I think the answer to your question is unlike crop circles where we can go there and get a stag meter, take samples of wheat home like we did many times. We can't do that with UFOs. Maybe the reason is it's so highly classified. Anyone who gets a piece of it, like your piece disappears or you disappear. So I'm saying because maybe the powers to be don't want you having UFO materials. I don't know if that's the reason. We just don't have the feedback that we should. I mean, this discussion's going on in Congress right now, as you're aware, about what are these special access programs and who should know about them? Why can't Congress know about them? Big implications if I think it's now being called non-human intelligence, NHI. So, I mean, whether the public is ready or not, it's coming at us because it's being talked about in Congress, and we know they're quite frustrated with the way the Pentagon's been dragging its heels about talking about what it knows about this topic. I mean, it's gone in the direction of disinformation and psychological operations rather than public education. I think it's a mistake. Right? Just admit these. We don't know what they are. Maybe someone does. I don't. They're from somewhere. I'm just saying somewhere because how do we know they're not from another dimension on Earth? How do we know they're not from under the ocean? We don't know they're extraterrestrial. They could be. But whatever they are, this NHI, I mean, it's high time to have a conversation with it because you read, I read, we listen to podcasts, and you hear people talking about their experiences with this. I mean, that's why I wrote Dark Matter Monsters. I had so many people who I taught remote viewing to tell me about their Bigfoot experiences in Colorado. I mean, natives of Colorado who grew up there. After I got to know them, long period of time, they finally told me their Bigfoot stories. And their parents said, "Oh, that's a bear. Don't ever, never talk about this again. You're never going to say anything about this. It was just a bear. It's a bear. Yeah, bear with two legs and opposable thumbs that can howl. You make your, you know, car stall. Sure." So it was to me a topic. Growing up in the New York area, I never heard anything about Bigfoot. I saw the Patterson Gimlin film, like a lot of people did in movie theaters as a preview, a little short before the movie. I mean, I didn't hear anything about Bigfoot growing up in this part of the country where I grew up in. It was only going out. Well, I know they exist all over the Bigfoot because I've talked to enough people now. They do exist in suburban areas too, but it was going out west, going to grad school out west, starting to talk to people, hearing things. And my mind is just like everyone else. I kind of pushed it away. Even though I studied these topics, I didn't realize the significance until I started talking to witnesses and I heard the stories of the battery camera and the failure. And I go, oh man, I think I've heard this before. This must, and I could be wrong, Joshua, but in my mind, I'm thinking, well, this has got to be some similar principle in some way back to crop circles. I mean, I know you've never heard anyone link Bigfoot to crop circles, probably ever. But you see some of the same stuff going on there. So something about the vortex structure of some of those crop circles must link to some way that Bigfoot manipulates EM fields energy, coherent matter in some way through sound, cavitation, something they're doing to create these really cool effects that they seem to have. I mean, they can go invisible in front of you. They seem to, I've talked to people who said they walked into a tree, they disappeared into a tree. They said, I didn't even believe in this, but I saw it. They show me pictures of where it happened. I mean, this is what you hear over and over again. So, just to finish this little section here, I mean, science works on repeatable evidence and data. If you got witnesses over the decades saying the same thing over and over, I think it's time to look at it rather than just brush it away. Why not take a risk? Yeah, you're taking a risk, but isn't that what science is about? Are we really doing science if we never study new topics and look at things in a different way? We always have to look at it the way our advisors, our academic advisors looked at it. We're never going to make any progress if we're just totally in fear of looking weird to our other academic colleagues because they have meetings and they vote on you. They review you. This is long before social media. You got likes and dislikes and reviews, and it's the basis of academic promotion. You are thinking about it. Even as an assistant professor, I was thinking about it, but it bugged me too much, which is why I went out of that system and created my own companies to teach remote viewing and study these topics because I didn't like that pressure. It just felt to me like to go against the grain of the way I was brought up, which is to tell the truth about what you're perceiving and not. I just felt it was time to stop hiding all of this. And that's why I never continued after being an assistant professor. I just realized I was going to have to do my own thing.
Um, Here's a far out question, if you don't mind.
No
Um,
problem.
are DMT trips possibly some inter or intra-dimensional form of remote viewing?
Well, it could be. It's something I've thought about and people have brought up to me. Um, it could be that some of these drugs affect the frequency of your perception because people who take DMT say, "Oh, I think is that ayahuasca?" They were encountering the same sort of phenomena. I'm thinking more of ayahuasca, but I think it applies to DMT too. It could change your frequency. You're perceiving another aspect of reality that you normally don't perceive. Uh, like this is a concrete example. Like bats use echolocation. You watch them out there on a summer night, man. They're dodging around. They have to eat their own body weight in insects every day. It's a lot of insects to catch. We don't hear their echolocation, so it's not real to us, but it's real to them. So that means this is how things coexisting in the same space can have different frequencies. So I think these drugs, maybe some of this is hallucination, or maybe some of it is our eyes only perceive a certain bandwidth of the electromagnetic spectrum. Maybe it shifts you in ways you're just more sensitive to other things that you normally aren't. And I'm just saying, as someone who hasn't done much in the way of recreational drugs, I mean, marijuana is now legal in my home state of Colorado, as it is in most states in the country. I really haven't done much beyond that, really nothing. So I can't really comment from personal experience.
So, in a court of law, corroborating evidence is very important. And
Right.
as you were mentioning, the experience of Bigfoot and um, it, even cryptids, there's a lot of people who are corroborating each other's
Yeah,
encounters and experiences with
they are.
that. Um, so, how would you explain the overall position of cryptids and what they are? Are they deep underground military bunker escapees, or is it once again the electromagnetic frequencies that are creating these bizarre encounters?
And that is a good question. And this is also something I think about all the time, read about all the time. It's really funny you mentioned that because I remember reading a psychologist saying the reason that Bigfoot is described so consistently around the world from continent to continent. Yeah, slight difference in hair color, Yeti or white. Our Bigfoot tend to be more darker, but some are Yeti looking occasionally. they said it's a proof that it's a hallucination of the brain because it's so consistent. You see, even if you get the consistency, they're going to say, well, that's a hallucination of the brain, which proves that it's not real because it's so consistent. So this isn't like the people that say there's no good pictures of UFOs. You finally get a good picture of a UFO, and they're going to say, oh, it's too good. It must be computer generated. Damned if you do, damned if you don't, because you have this prejudice, and then it's not good picture, oh, blurry. And this is the same thing that happens with the freaking cryptid sightings and Bigfoot sightings. I mean, these witnesses who experience Bigfoot, and some people believe cryptids are different from Bigfoot. And you said escaped from a bunker. They used to call Bigfoot escaped gorillas about 100 years ago. I mean, they had no idea what they were in our country 100. They escaped gorillas, wild men, mountain devils, all these different. And then Native Americans had all different names. They were here long before Caucasian folks like you and me. Native Americans had hundreds of different tribes, had hundreds of the ancient ones, and there's different types of them and all these different names. So that is a consistency of the fact that the Native Americans, I mean, it's not like they just made stuff up. They said it was as real as a deer or a beaver or a river otter, and there's no reason why they paint them in the same murals right there. Um, so the consistency of it is impressive from report to report. And I'm talking across decades in different parts of North America. It's the same sort of creature showing up with the same habits and patterns. The Bigfoot, they like water, they like to swim, they like to steal your fish if you turn your back on it, or you grab your deer for hunters and stuff. Yeah, they are smart and they know human behavior really well, just like the Native Americans told us that they were here before they came over the Bering Straits. The ancient ones were here. They're some ancient, relative, some ancient primate relative of humans, but they've developed in ways that we haven't. We are technologically dependent. They're just how we've developed over hundreds and thousands of years. Their nature integrated. They just work more closely with natural world around them. They're exceedingly good at uh, camouflaging themselves and cloaking. I mean, they have turned it into their own science of hiding and evading people. They can be ultra quiet. You could pass them on a trail, you wouldn't see them. If they don't want to be seen, you won't see them. They'll just blend into being a tree. I spoke to a witness that said she saw one with moss on its back. All its whole back was covered in moss. And when she looked at the Native American lore on the Olympic Peninsula, she found a reference to Moss Man from the natives. It could just wrap its arm around a tree and look like a tree. It's really quite incredible. And cryptids, too. I mean, they go off in directions where we don't even have names for what people are encountering out there. I mean, they're bipedal. They have some human characteristics, but they may not have the facial features we do. They may be covered in hair. They may not be. They may resemble cats. They may resemble wolves. We call them dogman. Some of the Bigfoot people say it was more like a cat. Out in the Columbia River area in Washington, I'm familiar with, there's the Klickitat ape cat, which is like a black cat with an ape-like face. Over 60 reportings of that, according to James Shubsky, who runs Marge Outdoor Store, where people can go. I visited it. You can report. There's an online reporting station right in the store. He got so many reports. He said, let's just put up a little corner of the store, have a reporting station for paranormal phenomena. And he has just hundreds of reports, the same thing over and over again. Little people, what the Northwest Native Americans called the bugwas. These are shorter, 3-foot high beings that resemble humans, but they're very small, little people. There are all types of these creatures. My theory about it, I think that the way they've developed, and this is why I call it dark matter monsters, I think they're interacting with or harnessing another type of matter than we're used to, coherent matter. And this is why they're so often seen around orbs and light phenomena, especially Sasquatch. People will say they're followed by orbs. They're seen around orbs. The Native American tribe in Central California, the Mika, they had a saying. It starts with an M. Perhaps I'll remember. Their saying was, "Wherever a Bigfoot goes, a lantern follows." So there's this association between orbs and Bigfoot and the types of Sasquatch phenomena, the mind speak, the space-time distortions people experience that suggest that they're interacting with matter in a different way than we ordinarily do, you know. And to me, that suggests they're possibly interacting with dark matter, this type of matter that permeates the universe, but we don't interact with it directly, just gravitationally. But perhaps they know how to harness it in some way to create, the Lockheed scientists talked about these toroidal shapes creating anti-gravity effects by channeling neutrinos and dark matter and so forth. Perhaps this is the secret to their incredible strength, their ability to jump. I mean, I talked to a witness recently at Medellin Falls, where this movie, A Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot, was shown. I'm in this movie. People can find it on Amazon or Vimeo. A Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot. It's about the paranormal aspects of Bigfoot. And I spoke to a witness. He said this Bigfoot thought it was his cat at the door. He opened it up. It's this huge Sasquatch, really dark. And by the way, that's another clue. People often say they're so dark, they're darker than the night. They're darker than the background night sky without a moon. I mean, it's like they're made of something else. They don't reflect a flashlight. The physical explanation would be something about their hair is like polar bears. Maybe it's like hollow or something or clear. But another explanation is we're just dealing with something that's made of a different state of matter, which is why they can switch into this cloak mode very easily. I spoke to this guy, said it just jumped in the air. I mean, it just did this broad jump, I think you call it, just like airborne, from standing to airborne, hopped away 30 feet at a time, up in the air, didn't run. They don't need to do that. They can run fast if they want to, but this one just preferred to hop way up in the air and down, boom, up there. So they have this incredible strength among all their abilities. And this applies to the cryptids. Now, I can't answer whether these cryptids are a variety of Bigfoot. Stan Gordon, the Pennsylvania researcher, I talked with him recently. And it's on my YouTube channel. I have a couple interviews on my YouTube channel with Stan Gordon. He thinks Dogman, what we call Dogman, is a variant of Bigfoot. It's another type of Bigfoot, have more of a snout with pointy German Shepherd ears. I don't know. Could be. But I mean, he gets these types of reports, and he started out as a UFO investigator. I mean, he was only looking for UFOs, but these reports came into with the UFOs. So that's another clue that we're looking at something that occupies the same type of reality. It's Bigfoot, UFOs, cryptids. People tend to see them in the same areas. And then the researchers who study Bigfoot, I mean, they report strange things back in their homes. You've heard about the hitchhiker effect, I imagine. This idea that it kind of follows you home. I don't know if it's literally hitchhiking. I don't know what that means, but it's that idea that these phenomena tend to go together. Birds of a feather flock together. Well, my birds of a feather have lower permittivity, which is why they have these electrical effects that we normally don't see. If we had lower permittivity like orbs and ball lightning and Bigfoot seem to exhibit, our electronics would not be working right here. You have to have insulators to make semiconductors. And if it doesn't semiconduct, if it's conducting too much, it's not a semiconductor anymore, and you don't have this control we have over EM effects and electricity and light that allows us to communicate and the audience to watch the show. But if you're one of these creatures, you've opted out of electronics into lower permittivity environments to gain the benefits of space-time manipulation, cloaking. So we've chosen the route of electronic control and mechanical control, electronic control, information technology, which to us seems still like magic. It's amazing to have all these gadgets around that allow us to have group chats and talk around the world, right? The cryptids and the Bigfoot chose to go in another direction entirely, which is natural superconductivity, which is you can reproduce this in the lab. Bose-Einstein condensate at NIST labs in Boulder, 95, they reproduce this, turning matter into a wave, just one big particle is one wave function. You can do this in a lab, but that doesn't mean you can't do it in nature. And these creatures seem to me to have reproduced superconductivity in some ways. This is why people report Dogman and Bigfoot winking around their campsite. It doesn't walk between these spaces. You've heard this. It's here, and it's like discrete jumps. not they don't see it move. It's just like it visually, it seems to be in discrete places, like if you were turning a knob with discrete little notches in it, right? A, B, C, D. So that is indicative of another type of way to interact with space-time. And again, these lower permittivity effects are not just in labs. It's we just rediscover what nature already knows how to do. And perhaps these creatures, life forms, figured this out along their evolution throughout history. Sort of natural technology, if you know where I'm kind of getting it. And so they don't need houses, they don't need cars. They're as fast as cars when people say they're chasing them on the highway, you know. They have this morph ability. They can morph into different shapes. And people say sometimes they turn into other animals or trees. I mean, I know to our mind that seems, what? Are you serious? Yeah, this is what people say they're seeing. Or maybe it's something in our brains that perceives it that way. It's really hard to know. Maybe even that winking around the campsite is something our brain is doing. I don't know for sure, but it indicates a lot of abilities. We call it paranormal, we call it supernatural. You know, Bigfoot researchers in general shy away from this because they want it to be some sort of relic, primate, monkey type relative, maybe a human primate. But, you know, well, the Russian researcher Igor Bortsev gave a lecture in Bailey, Colorado at one of the conferences there. And he said, you know, we concluded after 50 years of studying Bigfoot in Russia that it was a paranormal human. And that sounds about right to me. Not a relic human from the past, something that coexisted with us that just learned how to occupy. To me, it seems like a parallel reality, Joshua. I can't prove that, uh, but it seems like that when people talk about them going into trees or vanishing in front of their eyes, disappearing in sort of like a flash of light or sparkles of light. That they just know how to interact in ways that we haven't quite figured out yet without technology.
So, what I had brought to mind was the thought that if, say, an octopus had never been known by the average person, they've never seen it or heard tale of it, and you tried to explain to them there's this creature with six legs, two arms,
Right,
and show them the way that it camouflages and the way that it uses tools and it can
right.
escape from aquariums. they
Yeah,
they wouldn't believe you. It would be impossible to get them to believe in something so
exactly.
alien.
Exactly. That's an excellent analogy.
um
Exactly. Exactly.
I think this is a good point to wrap it up, and I'll lend the
Yeah.
floor to you to tie it up however you want to put a bow on this conversation.
Yeah, no, it's a pretty big bow and it's a pretty important one, but it's our own mental prejudice that is limiting our ability to understand these phenomena because we always want scientists to give us their credentialed opinions. And then somehow it has the seal of approval, but they won't because they're tied into this older structure. They don't want to take risks. Just like the octopus example. They would rather say that the octopus, I don't believe it, than, well, who doesn't believe in octopus nowadays? But at the time they're discovered, it's easier just to say, I just think it's a misidentification of something else. And that's what we're talking about here. All of these phenomena that we call paranormal, I mean, this is just science waiting to be discovered, in my view. It's got the repeatability and the verifiability. I mean, you said that corroborating evidence in a legal setting, in a trial, in a courtroom, it's enough to convict people. It's enough to sentence people to death, witness testimony, right? Well, why isn't it strong enough when you get witnesses saying they saw the same thing, multiple witnesses to a Bigfoot sighting or cryptids or something? Why don't we believe them when you have multiple people saying this? Because there's another factor here is that people feel frightened by what they saw. They don't want to think about it. It's not just, you know, it's not just that they're thinking what their neighbors or parents are going to say or relatives. They don't want to think about it again because it was scary. I mean, it just was going like encountering an octopus on land right in front of you on the trail. You don't expect that. You expect to see them in the ocean and aquarium. You know, you don't expect them to see them walking up the trail. But that's what we're talking about. Is if the octopus approached you on the trail. You have no, we don't have any mental preparation for this. Maybe we should start in kindergarten. Say, hey, you know, one of the things you could encounter out there is something that just, we don't have, doesn't, we don't have an explanation. So to wrap it up, I think a lot of this has to do more with sociology than with technical science. It's our ability to use the resources we have and the mechanisms for observing and sensing reality. And this applies to UFOs and UAP too. Can we get past the giggle factor here and have a serious discussion about these topics instead of using it to hit people's weak point? Can we talk about it as adults instead of taking the easy route and just using it as a quick insult? And
Very
that's,
well put.
I would say that's where we're at. But that's what Congress, you listen to Congress right now, Senate, House, they're dealing with the same thing. You get groups of people there say, well, we really need testimony, but we want to hear what these witnesses in the military have seen. And uh, there's a giggle factor and other people. But I think it's moving in my own state here where I grew up, New York. Chuck Schumer, I never thought I'd see the day where Chuck Schumer, former congressman, now senator, is advocating UAP, UFO disclosure, and all these different amendments. He says he must have seen things that you and I haven't seen. Joshua, testimony from witnesses, and he knows it's real. So I think it's shifting in the right direction. I'm encouraged, and I'm glad we were able to have this discussion about it. Maybe we were able to help move the ball forward down the field a little bit to something where we can have some honest, serious discussion about all of these topics, not just laugh it away and giggle it away, really sit down, take a look, and decide what type of physics are we dealing with here.
So, do you have any plugs, products, or promotions? How can my listeners find you?
Well, I'm happy to, of course, I have to send people signed copies of my books. They can go to newcrystalmind.com, my blog, and there's a link there to get, signed copies. I'm revising Black Swan Ghosts, which is about all the UFO ET witnesses I encountered. A new edition is coming out in a couple of weeks with I've added more witness accounts to it. So if you want to go to my blog, New Crystal Mind, I'm happy to interact with you there. I have a YouTube channel, and just look up my name. And I like to post videos about these topics and so forth. And of course, if you're interested in RV, I always have these self-paced classes, or we have a monthly group, just like we do for Bigfoot experiencers. And you can go to my blog and see the link for RV training and so forth. And we have just a beginners group that meets once a month. People are welcome to join that if they want to give it a shot.
All right. Well, this has been a very mind-blowing conversation. I'm very happy we had it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very kindly for coming on. You take care, my friend.
Yep.
Please visit shitshooting101.com for more episodes, videos, blogs, and more to come. And if generosity compels you, go to the donation tab to help support the show to continue with no ads and no paywall. Either way, we appreciate your listens, follows, likes, and shares. Keep shit shooting, my fellow shit shooters, and bullshit be damned.
The word is mum, a word of silence, of secrecy. Most of us live by this word. Few find the courage to mumble unapproved topics. Even fewer still have the gall, the constitution, the balls to speak aloud those subjects scoffed at and mocked by the masses. The word is indeed mum. This word is motherly. It is a comforting bosom of nourishment for the weak and dependent. It is a nest of security and seclusion from the elements of open thought. Yet words are meant to be changed, redefined, and even swapped for terms more pertinent to our needs. Communication's the word. Discussion, dialogue, conversation spoken and trade of ideas and opinions. All things are sprouting seeds of conversation. Use your mouth to find ears. Use your ears to find a mouth. Speaking and listening are more than words. They are a breeding ground of mental evolution and enlightenment. Mum is the unopened vault of hidden neurons awaiting release. Communication is the word of words, turning the combination on the locked away muse of insight. No more mum. No more silence. No more secrecy. Let light be heard. Love, peace, happiness. Signing off. Deuces.
Thank you.